The old recorder wheezed to life, its wheels grinding with each revolution. Arthur Art Kavanagh sat hunched over his dining table, a whiskey bottle nearby, untouched. His gnarled hands trembled as he adjusted the microphone, glancing around the shadowy corners of his apartment, as though expecting someone or something to appear. "It's time," he rasped. "They'll probably find me after this. Maybe tonight. But I can't keep it to myself anymore." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You've been told it was sharks that killed us, and that's partly true. The sharks were there, sure, but they weren't what took most of us. They weren't the worst thing in that water." He paused, eyes wet with unshed tears. "They've lied to you for decades, to protect you. I kept their secret too, but I can't die without someone knowing the truth. Someone has to know what we woke up down there." Art's story began the way history remembers it. On July 30th, 1945, the USS Indianapolis was steaming through the Philippine Sea, having just delivered the atomic bomb components to Tinian Island. The men were restless but relieved. The war felt close to ending, and the cruiser's mission had been a success. "It was a beautiful night," Art said. "Calm seas, the moon big and bright. I was on the deck with some of the guys playing cards, laughing. The war felt a million miles away. That peace shattered in an instant. We never saw the torpedoes, just felt the explosion. The whole ship lurched like a beast had grabbed hold of it. Men were screaming before I even knew what was happening. Water flooded in so fast you'd swear the ocean was angry at us. In 12 minutes, the USS Indianapolis was gone, swallowed by the Pacific. Nearly 900 men found themselves in the water, clinging to debris or wearing life vests. "We thought the worst was over," Art murmured. "We thought the fight was behind us, but it wasn't. It was just beginning." In the darkness, the survivors huddled in groups, calling out for missing friends, praying for rescue. The water was warm, too warm for Art's liking. I should have known then that something was wrong. It wasn't just warm, it felt alive, like it was waiting for something, watching us. By dawn, the first bodies were missing. "At first, we thought it was the sharks," Art said. "They showed up not long after the sun rose, fins slicing through the water. You'd see them dart in, hear someone scream, and then the water turned red. But there were other things beneath the waves. Shadows, massive, alien shapes that moved with a purpose no shark could mimic. By the second day, we realized something else was hunting us. Something bigger, something worse." Art's voice cracked as he described them. "They were like nothing I'd ever seen. Long, eel-like bodies, but thicker. Dozens of limbs, tentacles maybe, snaking through the water. And their eyes glowing yellow like lanterns. They'd rise just far enough for you to see them, like they wanted you to know they were there. The creatures weren't indiscriminate killers. They were intelligent. They observed, learning their prey before striking. They'd toy with us," Art said bitterly. "You'd feel them brush past your legs, just enough to make you panic. And when they came for you, they didn't rush. They'd coil around you, drag you under slowly, as if savoring it." The screams of the taken echoed across the water, growing fewer as the hours passed. By the third night, Art and the other survivors began hearing whispers. "At first, I thought I was losing it," Art said. "But then the others started hearing them too. Voices, speaking a language none of us could understand. Deep, guttural sounds, like the ocean itself was trying to talk to us. The voices weren't just sounds. They were invasive, creeping into the men's thoughts. You'd hear your own name whispered, feel this pull, like they were calling you to them. Some guys couldn't take it. They swam toward the voices, straight into the deep, and we never saw them again. Art shivered at the memory. One guy, Peterson, said they were in his head. He started laughing, screaming that they were showing him things, horrible things. He drowned himself just to make it stop. The survivors realized the creatures were herding them. They kept us in groups, picking us off one by one, Art said. If you tried to swim away, they'd drag you back, like they wanted us together, easier to manage. Art described the water around them as growing darker, thicker, as though the ocean itself was changing. By the fourth day, it wasn't water anymore. It was something else, something alive. It stank of rot, and it clung to your skin. The survivors dwindled, their numbers dropping with horrifying speed. On the fifth day, rescue planes arrived. But by then, fewer than 320 men were still alive. I should have been relieved, Art said, but all I felt was dread. The creatures didn't panic when the planes came. They just sank back into the deep, like they knew we'd be gone soon, like they knew we were only the beginning. When the survivors were pulled from the water, the Navy immediately silenced them. They told us it was sharks, Art spat. Said no one would believe us if we told the truth. Hell, half of us didn't believe it ourselves. They swore us to secrecy, said it was for the good of the country, for the good of humanity. Art knew there was more to it. They weren't just protecting their reputation. They knew something. They knew what those things were, and they knew they couldn't stop them. Art described the debriefings, the threats, the pressure to stick to the shark story. They destroyed every piece of evidence, made us sign papers, swore us to silence. They even spread rumors to discredit anyone who tried to talk. It worked. For decades it worked. But Art couldn't forget. I see them in my dreams, he whispered. Every night. Those yellow eyes, watching me, waiting. I don't think they're done with me. I don't think they're done with us. Art leaned closer to the recorder, his eyes hollow. They're still out there, he said, and they're patient. The Navy knew they couldn't kill them, so they buried the truth. But they're not gone. They're just waiting. And one day they'll come back. Art's voice cracked with emotion. If you're listening to this, don't go into the open water. Don't let them find you. And for God's sake, don't believe the lies. The sharks didn't kill us. They just cleaned up the mess. The tape ended abruptly, but Art's warning didn't die with him. 2 days after the recording was discovered, Art's body was found in his apartment. The coroner ruled it a heart attack, but his neighbors whispered of strange sounds in the night. Low, guttural voices echoing from the walls. The Navy denied any knowledge of Art's claims. The official story remained unchanged. The USS Indianapolis tragedy was a tale of shark attacks and survival. But those who listened to Art's tape knew better. They knew the ocean held darker secrets, ancient predators lurking in the depths, waiting for their time to rise again. And they knew that some secrets, no matter how deeply buried, refused to stay hidden. The morning it started, everything felt normal. The sky was clear, the breeze steady, and the Sea Lark, a modest 40-foot sailboat, glided smoothly across the Pacific. For Captain Eric Malone, this voyage was a dream long in the making, a solo crossing of the Pacific. It was meant to be a test of his skill, his resilience, and his will. Eric had planned meticulously, as any seasoned sailor would: charts, GPS, a redundant set of navigation tools, and enough provisions to last far beyond the expected journey time. He had faith in his boat and himself. The Pacific was vast, yes, but manageable. With enough preparation, even the ocean could be conquered. But there were things no amount of preparation could account for. By midday, Eric noticed the first anomaly. The horizon seemed strange. Normally, it was a comforting constant, the dividing line where sea met sky. But now, it looked sharper somehow, unnaturally perfect. No distant land, no cloud formations, just an unbroken, unnatural line. He adjusted the autopilot and stepped to the rail, shielding his eyes from the sun. "Just a trick of the light," he muttered. The ocean was clear, calm and deep blue. Nothing seemed out of place. Still, the strange clarity of the horizon lingered in his thoughts. By nightfall, Eric began to feel the first pangs of genuine unease. The stars, his trusted celestial companions, had vanished. The sky above him was pitch black, not obscured by clouds, but empty. His GPS blinked erratically, displaying nonsensical coordinates. The compass, an old relic he kept as backup, spun wildly. "This can't be right," Eric murmured, tapping the compass. It wasn't just the instruments. The ocean itself felt wrong. The waves had died down completely, leaving the sea lark gliding over a mirror-like surface. There was no sound but the occasional creak of the boat. Eric tried the radio. "Mayday, mayday, this is the sea lark. I've lost navigation. Can anyone read me?" Static answered. He repeated the call, trying different frequencies, but the result was the same. As he leaned back, the static seemed to shift. Beneath it, faint and distant, he thought he heard a voice, a whisper, melodic and alien. Shaking his head, Eric dismissed it as a trick of his stressed mind and went below deck. Sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, it brought nightmares. The following morning, Eric awoke to find nothing had changed. The sky was the same sickly blue as the day before, devoid of clouds, putain, or any sign of life. The sun was high, but something about its light felt wrong. Too cold, too steady. The horizon was sharper than ever, unnaturally perfect. No matter how far he sailed, it stayed the same distance, encircling him like a prison. Even the water felt different. It was still clear, but unnervingly so, revealing endless depths. And deep below, something moved. Eric froze at the rail, staring down into the abyss. He couldn't see it clearly, but the shape was massive, darker than the ocean around it, and it shifted with an unnatural fluidity. Whatever it was far below him, but not far enough. Heart pounding, he backed away, his mind racing. He busied himself with the sails, the rigging, anything to distract himself from the oppressive stillness. But as the day wore on, the stillness began to feel alive. By evening, the whispers returned. This time, they weren't confined to the radio. They seemed to come from all around him, carried on the still air and the silent waves. Eric gripped the rail, his knuckles white, his breath shallow. "Who's there?" he shouted into the emptiness. The whispers stopped. For a moment, the silence felt heavier than the sound. Then, from deep below, a low hum began to rise, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to come from the water itself. It rattled the hull of the sea lark, reverberating through Eric's bones. He stumbled back, retreating to the cabin, and locked the door behind him. When Eric stepped back onto the deck the next morning, he froze in place. The sea around him had transformed. Towering waves like frozen walls of glass surrounded the sea lark in a perfect circle. They didn't crash or move, but stood still, as though frozen in time. They loomed over the boat, impossibly high, shimmering faintly in the cold sunlight. This isn't real," Eric whispered, his voice barely audible. He stepped to the rail, staring up at the sheer walls of water. He could see fish trapped within the waves, their bodies frozen in mid-swim. And then he saw the figures. They stood atop the waves, their forms tall and spindly, shimmering like heat mirages. At first, Eric thought they were human, but as they moved, he realized how wrong he was. Their limbs were too long, their movements too fluid, like ripples in water. Their faces were featureless, smooth and pale, and yet he felt their gaze on him, heavy and unrelenting. Eric stumbled back, his breath coming in short gasps. "What do you want?" he shouted, his voice cracking. The figures didn't respond, but Eric felt something press against his mind. Images flooded his thoughts. Ancient storms raging over primordial oceans, cities sinking beneath black waves, and colossal shapes rising from the depths. Eric screamed, clutching his head. The images were too much, too vast, as if the ocean itself were trying to pour its memories into his fragile human mind. He collapsed to the deck, shaking, and the figures watched in silence. By the fourth day, Eric had given up trying to sail. The Sea Lark was adrift, and no matter which direction he turned, the horizon remained the same. The towering waves were gone, replaced by an endless expanse of still water. But the ocean wasn't empty. Shadows moved beneath the surface, massive shapes that defied explanation. They drifted slowly, deliberately, as if circling him. The whispers grew louder, clearer. They weren't random noise anymore. They were voices, speaking in a language Eric couldn't understand. Sometimes they laughed, a cold, mocking sound that echoed across the still water. Eric sat on the deck, staring into the void, his mind unraveling. The isolation, the silence, the impossibility of it all. It was too much. "What do you want from me?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. The answer came, not in words, but in understanding. The ocean wasn't just water, it was alive. It was ancient, intelligent, and hungry. The figures, the shadows, the whispers, they were all part of it, extensions of its will. And Eric was trespassing. On the fifth day, the figures returned, rising from the water like phantoms. They stepped onto the deck, their movements fluid and alien. Eric didn't run. There was nowhere to go. One of them extended a hand, long and translucent, as if made of water. Eric understood without words. He could join them, become part of whatever existed in this strange, infinite place. Or he could resist and face their wrath. He stared at the hand, his mind racing. He thought of his life, his friends, the world he had left behind. But those things felt distant now, like a dream he could barely remember. Tears streamed down his face as he reached out. For decades, the USS Harrow, a submarine lost during World War II, remained one of the greatest mysteries of the Pacific. Disappearing without a trace during a routine patrol in 1944, it was assumed destroyed by enemy forces. The truth was more complex. In 2023, a private salvage team led by marine archaeologist Dr. Evelyn Greer finally discovered the wreck, lying nearly 3 miles deep in a remote trench. The world celebrated the find, eager for the secrets the sunken vessel might hold. But no one was prepared for what waited inside. Evelyn's team consisted of seasoned professionals. There was Mark Carter, the submersible pilot, Alice Tanaka, a deep-sea engineer, and Daniel Price, a military historian with a special interest in Wabipu naval history. Together, they operated the Abyssal Dawn, a state-of-the-art research vessel equipped with advanced sonar, robotic submersibles, and a pressurized manned submersible named Erebus. The Harrow was located in the Shiranui Trench, a desolate part of the ocean few had ever explored. The sonar scans showed the submarine lying at an unnatural angle, its bow partially embedded in the seafloor as though it had crashed at high speed. The wreck looks intact, Daniel remarked, studying the scans. Unusually intact, Evelyn agreed. A torpedo strike should have caused more damage. This doesn't look like enemy fire. Maybe it's a structural failure, Alice suggested, though her tone carried doubt. Or something internal, like an explosion in the torpedo room. Mark, leaning over the sonar screen, frowned. Whatever it was, something feels off about this. The Erebus launched early the next morning, its reinforced hull groaning as it descended into the crushing darkness of the trench. Evelyn, Mark, and Daniel sat inside, surrounded by glowing instrument panels. As they approached the wreck, the eerie stillness of the trench began to take its toll. The lights from the Erebus cut through the black, illuminating the Harrow's sleek silhouette. The submarine's hull was largely intact, but its surface was encrusted with strange white coral formations that pulsed faintly, as though alive. "Never seen coral like that before," Mark murmured, steering the Erebus closer. "It's bioluminescent," Evelyn noted, fascinated. "But why is it pulsing like that? It almost looks like it's breathing." They stopped near the submarine's bow, where the large hatches leading to the torpedo room stood open. Inside, the darkness seemed unnaturally thick, swallowing the Erebus's lights. Shaken but determined, the team continued their exploration. They reached the control room, where they found the submarine's logbook, preserved in a sealed container. Evelyn retrieved it, using the Erebus's robotic arm, and began flipping through the pages. "The last entry," she said, her voice tight. "It's dated July the 7th, 1944. Daniel leaned closer. "What does it say?" Evelyn read aloud. "We've entered a sector of the trench that feels wrong. Equipment is failing. The men are hearing things, seeing things. Lieutenant Carter was found in the torpedo room this morning, muttering about the voices. He didn't respond when I called his name. We're leaving this place immediately." She turned the page. "There's more. July 8th, 1944. The Harrow is lost. The voices are inside now. They won't let us leave. God help us all." The team sat in stunned silence. "What the hell happened here?" Daniel whispered. As they prepared to leave, the Erebus's systems began to malfunction. The lights flickered violently, and the whispers turned into screams. "We need to get out of here, now!" Mark shouted, frantically working the controls. The submersible lurched as something struck it from below. A loud clang echoed through the cabin, followed by a groaning sound like metal being twisted. "What the hell was that?" Evelyn cried. Mark turned the Erebus's external cameras toward the hull of the Harrow. What they saw froze them in place. The ghostly figures were no longer faint or shadowy. They were solid, their hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dark. They crawled along the Harrow's exterior, their movements jerky and unnatural. "They're trying to stop us," Daniel whispered, his voice shaking. One of the figures reached out, its hand passing through the Erebus's hull. Evelyn screamed as frost spread across the interior glass, forming strange, alien patterns. "They're inside," Mark shouted. Mark pushed the Erebus's engines to their limits, maneuvering the submersible through the Harrow's twisted corridors. The figures pursued them, their hollow eyes glowing brighter. The screams inside the cabin grew louder, deafening. It wasn't just the ghostly crew. They were hearing each other's voices, distorted and mocking. "Evelyn, behind you!" Daniel shouted. But when she turned, nothing was there. The Erebus finally burst out of the Harrow, its thrusters propelling it away from the wreck. But the figures followed, their forms dissolving into the water and reforming closer to the submersible. "We're not